il professor John Lydon, che è ex allievo salesiano, compagno di John Dixon, che ha conseguito titoli accademici presso le università di Durham, Liverpool e Surrey, e il suo dottorato di ricerca si è concentrato sul tema dell'insegnamento come vocazione nel contesto contemporaneo. È Senior Fellow della Higher Education Academy, direttore del Master in Catholic School Leadership Program e vice direttore del Center for Research and Development in Catholic Education presso la St. Mary's University di Londra. È anche Associate Editor della principale rivista accademica di questo centro, che è l'International Studies in Catholic Education, e ricopre il ruolo di adjunct si dice così? Scusi in inglese. Associate Professor e co-direttore di un programma universitario della Università Notre Dame di Londra, membro di vari comitati, tra cui il comitato direttivo della World Union Catholic Teachers e della Catholic Education of Teachers, Schools and Colleges in England e Wales. Di recente è stato nominato responsabile del gruppo tematico sull'educazione del Catholic Inspired NGO Forum for Education, che collabora con la Segreteria di Stato Vaticana. Tiene regolarmente conferenze negli Stati Uniti, in Europa, in varie nazioni dell'Europa, in Africa, in Asia, in Australia, e le principali aree della sua ricerca riguardano il capitale spirituale, la leadership nelle scuole cattoliche, la trasmissione dei carismi religiosi e la connotazione che il carisma religioso dà alle diverse scuole cattoliche. Per esempio il carisma salesiano, che tipo di connotazione dà alle opere salesiane. Cito sue pubblicazioni: Transmission of Charism 2009, The Contemporary Catholic Teacher, e Appraisal of the Concept of Teaching as Vocation 2011, Contemporary Perspective on Catholic Education del 2018, e il suo contributo più recente è intitolato Salesian Accompaniment in Formal and Non-Formal Settings, che è stato pubblicato da Veritas, l'editrice, nel volume collettaneo Catholic Education, Formal, Informal and Lifelong. Allora, come avete visto sul programma, il suo intervento ha un titolo particolare, perché dice An Appraisal of the Contribution of Great Britain Province, the Salesians of St. John Bosco, to the Global Salesian Missionary Endeavour, e cioè un bilancio, una valutazione del contributo dell'Ispettoria Salesiana della Gran Bretagna all'impegno missionario salesiano a livello globale. E questo è veramente un approccio interessante, per cui l'ascoltiamo volentieri. 5 minutes. A lei,
thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aldo Giraudo, for that very full description of what I do. I'll be speaking in English, so I'll be the second of this conference, but before I begin, I'd want to express my sincere thanks to Father Bogdan Kolar for his invitation to participate in this ACSSA conference 2 years ago. I would also like to thank the President, Sister Maria Mao, and Father Stanislaus Zimniak for their welcome and hospitality. I often start with this picture because it impresses at least some people. When I presented my book as a member of the World Union of Catholic Teachers to Pope Francis at a private audience a while ago. Don Motto said to me, he asked who the bishop was. That is a Salesian bishop, Bishop van Looy, the former Bishop of Ghent, and Don Motto also said that this links. Don Motto also said I must speak more slowly than Father Dixon, so I will try to do that. And I have PowerPoint slides now to help in that process. So you know all about me. Thank you, Don Giraudo. So that's the outline of what I'm trying to do. And I know some of you understand English, which is great. So just 5 distinctive parts. So the introduction, it's on the slide. So the Great Britain province of the Salesians of Don Bosco was established at the turn of the 20th century in southwest London. The work of the Salesians expanded rapidly in proportion to the number of young men presenting themselves as Salesians, the number of whom doubled in the 6 years following the First World War. This expansion reached its zenith in the mid-1960s when the number of Salesians in Great Britain touched 500, enabling the order to run 7 secondary schools and 2 boarding schools for pupils with learning disabilities in Great Britain alone, alongside ministering in a number of parishes and youth centres. And these were linked closely with the schools. From the outset, a considerable number of Salesians volunteered to support the global Salesian missionary endeavour, especially in South Africa and India, and extending beyond to countries including Hong Kong, China and South America in the pre-Vatican II eras, which Don Bogdan Kolar asked me to focus on. So the establishment and the development. This is a significant book, The Salesians in Great Britain, A History of the Province of St. Thomas of Canterbury, as it was called then, now the Great Britain province. Father John Dixon traces the origins of the Great Britain province in some detail, citing St. Dominic Savio's dream in the 1850 as its catalyst, illustrating the vivid impression that reports of the so-called Second Spring of the Catholic Church in England had made in contemporary Piedmont. Dixon then goes on to outline a series of key members of the hierarchy in influencing St. John Bosco to approve the establishment of a Salesian mission in England. However, alongside these key members of the hierarchy are some significant lay people whom Don Bosco encountered since he was an influential figure in French and Roman society. One of them was the Countess of Stackpoole. And this is recorded by Don Soria in the 18th volume of the biographical memoirs. So the Countess of Stackpoole, who had been named several times in the biographical memoirs, did more than anyone else to bring the Salesians to London. Likewise, alongside the Countess, Don Bosco's great friend Archbishop Kirby, rector of the Irish Seminary in Rome, warmly welcomed that foundation. Although he was 85 years old, he called on Don Bosco 3 times in 1887 and begged him to cut off all delays. On May the 12th, since he had some good news and yet was unable to go outdoors, the bishop wrote, "Yesterday I had the honour of an audience with the Holy Father, and he deigned to express his great delight and satisfaction that you have agreed to take over the London church owned by the Countess of Stackpoole." Now this is another book of Father Dixon's. This was in fact his doctoral thesis, where he speaks about the rapid growth in the number of Salesians. So in his seminal work, The Dynamics of Growth, the Foundation of and Development of the Salesians in England, Dixon's account of the exponential growth appears to reflect Don Bosco's positivity. Dixon insists that one of the most striking features of the early years of Battersea was the startling growth in the number of Salesians from 3 to 37 by 1898. And in the large part, these were English vocations. And I speak about St. John Bosco's positivity because he said when he sent his first 2 priests, and this is recorded again in the biographical memoirs, he said to them, "The London house will be one of the most important in the congregation." Well, I guess that could be argued. But what is certainly true is that from the very beginning, and I have a record of it here, Battersea began to teach trades to young boys. I'm getting a nod from Don Caputo, thank you. That they started teaching trades, which meant that these young people would be eventually available to contribute significantly to the missions overseas. So this basic education in trades began there very early on. Now a more detailed analysis. This is a long quote from Don Michael Voistas about what he calls the golden age after the First World War. You can read it there, I'll read it maybe. So it's based not only on the number of missionaries sent and the missions they took up, which grew especially between 1923 and 39, but the approach of evangelization through education, and this remains classic. Employing Don O'Fray's a felicitous expression, the missionaries faithful to the Salesian tradition aimed straight at the young. To connect with young people, missionaries strove to create friendly relationships using games, entertainment and music. This was true of oratories, as well as schools, hospices, parishes and mission stations. After a while, the Salesian missionaries generally found themselves surrounded by a population that loved them and which gave rise to a nucleus of young Christians. And I rely on some of that on Don Moranworth, who I believe is in among us this afternoon. This is a significant letter. I don't know whether some Salesians will know this. Excuse me. Father Dixon has written an extensive work on the letters of Don Rua, building on Don MacPake's seminal work. Excuse me. So he's built on that and it's been published. But there's a letter of Don Rua to Father Macy, the provincial. The bit I like is in bold. He says, although as a good missionary, he should not attach too much importance to worrying about where his family would like him to be. But so very specifically, referencing self-sacrifice, which I'll return to later. The foundation of Figlie. Just a brief explanation of Figlie. It was a junior seminary for young boys from age 11. This was the real catalyst for the Salesian mission in Great Britain. And really, one of the key reasons for its being built was, as you see there, the strategic need for English-speaking missionaries across the world, especially in Africa and India. So it was actively promoted from the centre, from Turin. This is there were therefore several layers of consideration beyond where to place it. It was viewed as of profound significance, partly because as a junior seminary it would further rejuvenate the ranks of the Anglo-Irish province. Partly because it would contribute strategically to the congregation's international endeavours by producing a fresh flow of English-speaking Salesians. But also, this is very significant, and not least, because it would generate the true Salesian spirit, so singularly lacking, Don Aeneas Tozzi, the provincial taught, elsewhere in England. So, this was significant. And I should point out here, Reverend Father, sisters, colleagues, that the key Salesians in founding this missionary college were all Italian. Don Tozzi, Father Joseph Chanter, and indeed Father, sorry, his name's gone for a minute, but 3 Italian Salesians who were Don Angelo Franco, who were key to this development. Father Bernard Grogan, who will be known to some because he did much work in the Pisana as the English translator for the Rector Major, he speaks about this. It wasn't only India, is his point. So you can see we were in Hong Kong and several other countries. And the name here of Don Bernal Tohill is very significant. He was a key missionary from the English province, eventually became the consultant of the missions, more of that later. And you see there the foundation in Hong Kong, which the Salesians took over with 40 students, and in 5 years there were 300 students. So that's very, very significant. But India was the Salesians of Great Britain's biggest impact. And the point about Figlie, colleagues, is they all came from Figlie. All these 47 who went to India between those years went to Figlie first. So that is highly significant. Not all stayed a long time, of course, but as you see there, some died in their 20s. That'll be significant in a moment. Others after a lifetime, and others left the congregation. But a significant number remained. And I'm going to, I've done quite extensive research on in the archives for this paper, and these 3 Salesians, I think, made the biggest impact. The first one is the brother who died in his 20s, Brother Dennis Kavanagh. And he was described by the rector as a model Salesian. Model is one of my favourite words when I'm lecturing on ecclesiology. So this is a sacramental vision. This is a brother who is modelling St. John Bosco, and in modelling St. John Bosco, he's modelling Christ. So very, very significant. So, in the context of the Salesian mission to the poor, to whom Don Bosco was committed, we all know this, yeah? But this school that Kavanagh was on the leadership of, it's still spoken highly of by the Ministry of Labour and the Government of India. Father Austin Anderson. See how he's described, colleagues, fathers, sisters, with a zealous missionary spirit burning within him. So he manages a technical school, etc., etc. But for me, in a modern context, it expresses the classical servant leadership. We've all studied leadership theories of one variety or another. But when you read about Father Anderson, you see that his missionary zeal was vigorous rather than virtual, substantial as opposed to superficial. So that is significant. And again, earlier on, a colleague who spoke here was talking about, or put up on the screen there, St. John Bosco's reference to work, work, work. And here it appears to be modelled by Father Anderson. Father Patrick Burns. We move now, and we're going to move in a minute further to the notion of strategic leadership. Father Patrick Burns then was a leader in some schools, 2 or 3 schools in India. Again, from Northern Ireland, described at his death that he loved the Indian people as his own brothers and sisters. So you see, he first became the headmaster in Guwahati, and that still, I checked this, recognised as an excellent school, focusing again on the advancement of the poor. They're the words of the current website. And that reflects, everybody knows the rule of the congregation, number 26, I don't need to dwell on that, but so this is modelling the rule, if you like. Father Burns, however, deployed his talents, as you see, in writing biographies of 2 Salesian ministries, one of whom Brother Dennis Kavanagh has referenced earlier. So he's writing for future current brothers, future priests, future teachers. These lives, you should model your lives on them, as St. John Bosco with Magoni, Savio, etc., etc. And this is what his obituaries said. These biographies are of a simple type. Their value will be seen really when there will be no one left to tell the new generations of Salesians what these departed missionaries have done for the missions of Northeast India, for the church, and for the Salesian congregation. So that's my conclusion to all this, and I think it's expressed very well by Don Michael Voistas again, because that's what the Great Britain Salesians were doing. He talks about Northeast India, that's where we were predominantly, and that's what they did. They almost always began by founding or restructuring village schools. These were elementary schools for day students and vocational, technical or agricultural centres with both boarders and day students. Their motivation was clear: give adequate education to the Catholic youth of the mission. They did not have sufficient means to attend schools in the city because either they were too far away or the parents preferred their children to attend a Catholic school. From the very beginning, it was common for non-Christian students to be admitted to Salesian schools. And that is very much the case today in Salesian schools in Great Britain. Now I turn to Salesian missionaries from Great Britain and South Africa. And I'm not, and I hope you'll be pleased to know this, I'm not going to repeat Father Dixon's excellent detailed account of what the Salesians did in South Africa. You've heard that. So I've changed this to focus more on strategic leadership. Now I've referred to the trade school earlier, and you can see it there. So this is the connection. But we move now to William Richard Ainsworth. You see his name there, a priest of the GBR province, and he was the provincial delegate of South Africa. And for me, Father Dixon's book, that's the title there, is compelling in its account of the leadership of the South African mission which bridged the contrasting pre- and post-Vatican II ecclesial paradigms. So he's the first appointed provincial delegate 10 years before the opening of the Second Vatican Council. This is significant. This is Father Hall's letter. Father T.W. Hall was a big figure in the GBR province. You know, built a lot of schools, etc., etc. But look what he says. I'm going to read it. It has, of course, long been the desire of the superiors to give greater development to the work that's South Africa, by more careful cultivation of local vocations. For this purpose, with the consent and encouragement of the superiors, the General Council i.e., Father Ainsworth comes to you as delegate, listen to the words, colleagues, with all the powers necessary for the discharge of his duties. For all practical purposes, they are those of the provincial, and this is by lawful delegation. Be assured that his one desire will be to share with you the labours, the hopes, the fears, and the problems in your country, to unify and direct the common effort. So this, for me, is a very significant part of Father Ainsworth's ministry. And in terms of the ecclesial paradigm collaborative ministry, which I regard was kind of the seeds for that, were Pope Pius XII's encyclical Mystici Corporis, 1943. 10 years later, we've got this discharge of powers, as he says. So I see this as, you know, kind of prevenire, if you like, you know, in the context of Vatican II, 20 years after Pope Pius XII's encyclical. And Father Ainsworth's engaging the sisters, etc., etc., is a classical expression of that collaborative ministry. And the bishops of England and Wales put this better than I could. This is their redefinition of hierarchy. A renewed understanding would see it rather as a structure for ordering and unifying relationships. Hierarchy is what holds communion together, rather like the membranes in a leaf. It is part of what the Spirit gives to enable the Church to be maintained in truth and unity. It exists in dialogue and tension with the wider consensus and varied voices of the whole body.
5 minutes left.
Thank you for that. I was only warming up, but anyway, 5 minutes is fine. So this is my summary. He sensitively set in motion a very significant pastoral development of the Salesian work in South Africa and Swaziland, partly by promoting South African vocations in the essential work of the novitiate and studenthood of philosophy, partly by linking the delegation to the Irish province, harnessing the missionary zeal of many of the confrères who volunteered to work in the townships outside Johannesburg and on the Cape Flats, and partly by encouraging the outstanding educational pioneers like Father Fleming in Swaziland and the Salesian sisters in Cape Town and Johannesburg. I turn to contemporary developments finally. And there are 3. I should say briefly that I interviewed 3 former Salesian provincials. Sorry, 2 former, 1 current. And Father Preston is one of them, and he's well known to Father Caputo from the Ratisbon Monastery in Jerusalem. So Father Preston, Father Michael Winsterley, provincial twice, and indeed Father Gerard Bridie, who is provincial for a 2nd term. And they, in summary, I'm summarising what they said. So this is what we're doing in Great Britain at the moment. Both are volunteers, lay volunteers working in schools or orphanages, passing on vital skills such as music, sports, science and English. There are also opportunities to accompany young people in a non-formal context. Volunteers are paired with a community that needs the skills and experience which they bring to the project, therefore ensuring that they can make an impactful contribution. Based on experience of the project, volunteers gain new skills and have experiences that will help them mature as a person and view the world through a different lens. I don't know whether this is common in other parts of the Salesian world. I've not researched that, but we call it the Ad Tempus project, involving Salesian priests and brothers from overseas, committing to the Great Britain province for a contracted number of years. So it's echoing the original missionary endeavour, which I hope I've explained reasonably, in reverse. So, for example, a number of Indian Salesians are with us. South Africa and several countries of the African continent, Vietnam and more. And Father Bridie wanted me to stress this. The Great Britain province has made a significant financial commitment to the project's reference. For example, by continuing to support the Liberian mission 20 years after the GBR province handed the mission back to the congregation. Father Francis Preston reiterated the current provincial's positive appraisal of Bother and the Ad Tempus project, insisting that the Great Britain province's commitment to the Salesian mission as part of Project Africa, while originating in a post-Vatican II context, is seminal insofar as it represents a continuance with the pre-Vatican II era. Father Bernard Tohill, referenced earlier, represents a significant link in that, as consultant for the missions, announced the appointment of Father Joseph Brown from the Great Britain province as the first GBR missionary to Liberia in 1979, and I was privileged to be present at that announcement in Ushaw College, Durham. Project Europe, finally. So the report of Father Rocklaff Clement, then Councillor to the Missions, to the General Council in 2013, represents a prescient affirmation of the situation currently pertaining in the GBR province. His words: the provinces are learning how to accommodate and accompany the newly arrived confrere, how to insert them into the community, and how to entrust them with positions of responsibility in the life and missions of the community. Moreover, we already have some missionary rectors and one provincial councillor and that's meant to be in Great Britain, not Europe, apologies. And we have. So one of our provincial councillors is from Vietnam, and one of our rectors is from India, who did some great work in the Bazana previously. Father Sadhu John is his name. So in 2025 we are, if you like, fulfilling those prescient words of Don Clement. And this is my conclusion. Returning to the main theme of this paper, I believe that the contribution of the Great Britain province in the pre-Vatican II era to be especially significant. This paper has articulated the extensive nature of the reach of the Great Britain province missionaries globally, encouraging South Africa, India, Malta, Jamaica, Hong Kong, Thailand, and several South American countries, principally Argentina. The extent to which this commitment represents a catalyst for the contemporary missionary projects of the Great Britain province is worthy of further explanation. That contemporary developments represent a reversal of the pre-Vatican II project is reflected in Father Clement's statement that in relation to the contribution of both Project Europe and Ad Tempus, Salesians have the potential. At the vocational level, they are close to the young leaders or the few young local confrères. They rejuvenate those communities that have forgotten the young Salesians of the playground. They help create more fraternal and open communities. And I'll just finish, Father Don Giraudo, by saying the second bullet is especially true. Because if you come to London, please come to Battersea, Salesian College Battersea, where you'll see a rejuvenated community in reality. Very Reverend Fathers, Reverend Sisters, colleagues, thank you very much.
Ci sono tanti spunti nella sua sinteticità, poi leggeremo volentieri il suo contributo. In particolare qualcosa che mi tocca più da vicino, per esempio l'importanza delle biografie esemplari per la formazione identitaria salesiana e delle salesiane. Lo vediamo appunto accennato alle biografie che Don Bosco ha scritto per i suoi ragazzi e che continuano, perché lì è vero che si possono chiamare in modo un pochino così sufficiente biografie, come si dice, esemplari, no? Edificanti, ecco, edificanti, però sono edificanti nel senso positivo della parola, perché mantengono viva l'identità calata nel vissuto concreto delle persone.